Picture this. You've just experienced what feels like the ultimate spiritual breakthrough. Reality suddenly makes sense in ways it never did before. The patterns become crystal clear, the illusions transparent, and you can see the intricate web of consciousness that connects everything. Your first instinct? Share this incredible revelation with everyone you love. But here's what ancient wisdom keepers like Thoth understood that modern seekers often miss. This impulse to share your awakening is precisely what can destroy it. Think of spiritual truth like a living flame. The moment you try to capture it in words and hand it to someone else, you're no longer passing along the fire, you're offering cold ashes. Worse yet, certain insights become dangerous when spoken aloud, not because they're mystical secrets, but because they fundamentally alter how others perceive you and how you move through the world. Today we're exploring 5 specific revelations that every awakened person discovers, yet must never directly communicate. Understanding why these truths must remain unspoken isn't about keeping secrets, it's about preserving the very power that makes transformation possible. There's this moment that comes to everyone who experiences genuine spiritual awakening, and I mean the real thing, not just reading about it or thinking you understand it intellectually. It hits you like lightning, this overwhelming urge to grab the nearest person by the shoulders and shake them awake. You want to scream, "Don't you see? Don't you understand what's actually happening here?" The experience is so profound, so earth-shattering, that staying quiet feels almost criminal. But here's what Thoth understood, and what every awakened being throughout history has learned the hard way. This impulse to share your direct experience is not just futile, it's actually counterproductive. The moment you try to transmit your awakening experience to someone else, you've already lost the essence of what you're trying to convey. Think about learning to swim. You can read every book ever written about swimming. You can study the physics of buoyancy, memorize the perfect stroke techniques, understand the chemistry of chlorinated water. But until you actually get in that pool and feel the water supporting your body, until you experience that moment when you stop fighting the water and start moving with it, you don't know swimming. You know about swimming. This is exactly what happens with spiritual awakening. The experience itself, that direct, immediate knowing, cannot be packaged into words and delivered to another consciousness. It's like trying to mail someone the sensation of being wet. You can describe wetness in exquisite detail, but the person receiving your description will remain completely dry. I remember hearing about a man who experienced one of these profound awakenings while walking in his garden. He'd been struggling with meditation for years, trying to achieve some special state, when suddenly the whole framework of him walking in the garden completely dissolved. There was just walking, just garden, just pure experiencing without an experiencer. The separation between observer and observed vanished entirely. For maybe 20 minutes, he existed in this state of complete unity, where the question of who was experiencing what became meaningless. He rushed inside to tell his wife, practically vibrating with the significance of what had just happened. He tried to explain the dissolution of subject and object, the discovery that the seeker and the sought were the same thing, the incredible relief of dropping the burden of being a separate self. His wife listened patiently for about 2 minutes, then said, "That's nice, dear. Could you take the rubbish out before dinner?" Now, his wife wasn't being cruel or dismissive. She was responding from her current level of understanding, which is exactly what anyone does when presented with an experience completely outside their frame of reference. To her, he sounded like he was making a big deal out of nothing, maybe even showing off or having some kind of mental episode. This is why Thoth taught that the awakened person learns to be quiet, not from false modesty, but from understanding that words are merely fingers pointing at the moon. If someone isn't ready to look in the direction you're pointing, they'll just stare at your finger and wonder why you're so excited about it. The psychology behind this is fascinating. When you share these profound experiences, you inevitably sound like you're bragging, like you've achieved something special that others haven't. This immediately creates the very division that awakening dissolves. The moment you position yourself as the one who gets it, talking to someone who doesn't, you've recreated the illusion of separation that the awakening experience transcended. People become fascinated by the method rather than the truth it points toward. They want to know what you did, what technique you used, what book you read, what teacher you followed. They turn the pathless path into another spiritual practice to add to their collection. They miss the essential point that true awakening doesn't happen through doing something. It happens through stopping the doing and recognizing what was already present. This is exactly why we share the deeper, more sensitive aspects of these teachings through our private Insights Academy newsletter, along with our complete digital edition of the Kybalion. Some knowledge requires a prepared consciousness to receive it properly, and these platforms allow us to explore what would be too easily misunderstood in public forums. The awakened person discovers that their experience becomes a kind of secret they carry alone, not because they want to hoard it, but because sharing it actually obscures it. It's like trying to explain the color blue to someone who's been blind from birth. Your words, no matter how poetic or precise, cannot create the direct experience of blueness in their consciousness. This doesn't mean the awakened person becomes aloof or superior. Quite the opposite. They often become more compassionate, more present, more genuinely helpful in practical ways. They might take out the rubbish without being asked, listen more deeply, offer support where it's actually needed rather than where they think it should be needed. The real transmission happens through being, not through talking. When someone is ready for awakening, they'll recognize something in your presence, your way of moving through the world, your natural peace in the face of chaos. They won't need your explanations because they'll be having their own direct experience. This is perhaps the most difficult lesson for newly awakened people to learn. The experience is so extraordinary, so liberating that keeping quiet about it feels selfish, but silence often serves truth better than words. The awakened person learns to live the understanding rather than preach it, to embody the peace rather than describe it, to demonstrate the freedom rather than explain it. Your awakening is yours alone, not because you're special, but because all genuine spiritual experience is irreducibly personal and immediate. The moment you try to make it into something that can be shared, you've turned the living truth into dead information. And dead information, no matter how accurate, cannot awaken anyone. Here's something that might surprise you about spiritual awakening. The very practices that liberated you could become prison bars for someone else. I know this sounds backwards. When meditation finally cracked open your consciousness, when that specific breathing technique dissolved years of anxiety, when chanting those particular mantras shifted your entire reality, every fiber of your being wants to share these gifts with others who are suffering. But Thoth's wisdom cuts through this well-intentioned impulse with surgical precision. He understood that spiritual methods are like medicine, and giving the wrong medicine to someone, no matter how pure your intentions, can cause tremendous harm. Think about it this way. Two people come to you with headaches. You give them both the same pain reliever that worked miracles for you last week. The first person feels better within an hour. The second person ends up in the emergency room because their headache was actually a symptom of dangerously high blood pressure, and the medication you gave them made it worse. Same medicine, same dosage, completely different outcomes because the root causes were different. This is exactly what happens when we share our spiritual practices. What appears to be the same problem, suffering, disconnection, seeking, actually has radically different root causes in different people. The meditation that stilled your overactive mind might trap someone else who actually needs movement to break through their particular form of spiritual stagnation. I once heard about a student who meditated religiously for 5 years. Every morning, same cushion, same technique, same dedication, but nothing happened. No awakening, no peace, no transformation. He was becoming increasingly frustrated and starting to believe he was spiritually defective. When he finally approached his teacher in desperation, the teacher gave him the most shocking advice. Stop meditating entirely. For the next month, I want you to dance, run, shout, move your body in every way possible. Within 3 weeks, the student experienced the breakthrough that 5 years of sitting still couldn't provide. His particular spiritual knot required movement to untie, not stillness. The meditation practice, which had liberated thousands of others, had become his obstacle because it had transformed from a tool into a goal. This reveals something crucial about how methods can trap us. The moment you receive a specific practice, your mind immediately creates a timeline. If I do this correctly for long enough, I'll achieve enlightenment. This future-oriented thinking is the opposite of awakening, which is only ever available in this moment. The practice becomes a sophisticated form of postponement. But there's an even deeper issue at play. Different people have entirely different types of spiritual blockages. Some carry the weight of excessive thinking and need the medicine of silence. Others are trapped in emotional numbness and need the medicine of feeling. Some are stuck in their heads and need embodiment practices. Others are scattered in sensation and need mental focus. I've seen people who were naturally awakened get completely lost in meditation techniques because their path required surrender, not effort. The method became a new form of spiritual materialism, collecting practices like trophies, measuring progress, comparing experiences with others. When someone receives a method from you, something subtle but devastating often occurs. They shift from presence into performance. Instead of being with what is, they start doing something to get somewhere else. The very act of following a technique can pull them away from the natural awareness that was already emerging. Consider how this plays out practically. You share your breakthrough breathing pattern with a friend. Immediately, they're no longer breathing naturally. They're trying to breathe correctly. They're monitoring their technique, judging their performance, wondering if they're doing it right. The spontaneous awareness that could have flowered gets buried under layers of methodology. This is why truly awakened teachers throughout history have been notoriously reluctant to give techniques. They understand that each person's path is as unique as their fingerprint. What they offer instead is presence, a quality of being that can catalyze awakening without creating dependency on methods. The awakened person recognizes that their role isn't to provide prescriptions, but to create space where others can discover their own natural path to truth. They know that the moment you give someone a method, you risk turning them into a spiritual technician rather than supporting their emergence as a free consciousness. There's also the matter of timing. Spiritual practices are like seeds. They need the right conditions to grow. The same technique that transforms someone who's ready might overwhelm or confuse someone who needs different preparation. The awakened person can sense these subtle readiness cues, but methods themselves are blind to timing. What's particularly dangerous is how receiving methods can feed the ego's need to be doing something spiritual. People collect practices, compare notes about their experiences, measure their progress against others. The method becomes a new identity. I'm a meditator. I'm a breathwork practitioner. I'm following this particular path. This spiritual identity can be even more subtle and persistent than ordinary ego identities. The deepest truth Thoth points us toward is this: awakening isn't something you achieve through correct practice. It's something you already are that gets revealed when obstacles dissolve. And those obstacles are different for everyone. Your breakthrough came through stillness. Someone else might need chaos. Your path required discipline. Another person might need complete spontaneity. So instead of sharing your methods, share your presence. Instead of giving techniques, offer understanding. Instead of providing prescriptions, create space for others to discover what their own being is calling for. This doesn't mean being unhelpful or withholding support. It means offering something far more valuable than methods, the living example of someone who has found their way home to themselves, and the patient presence that allows others to find their own unique path to that same destination. When you awaken spiritually, one of the most startling abilities that emerges is the capacity to see through people's masks with laser-like clarity. It's as if a veil has been lifted from your perception, and suddenly you can observe the intricate dance of ego defenses, unconscious patterns, and self-deceptions that govern most human behavior. You see the wounded child hiding behind the aggressive boss, the deep insecurity masquerading as arrogance, the fear of abandonment driving someone's controlling behavior. This newfound clarity brings with it an almost overwhelming temptation, the urge to help people by sharing what you see. Your heart fills with compassion as you watch someone you care about stumbling through the same destructive patterns, completely blind to their own role in creating their suffering. Every fiber of your being wants to reach out and say, "Can't you see what you're doing? Don't you realize how your behavior is pushing people away?" The impulse feels noble, even loving. After all, if someone could just see their blind spots, wouldn't that set them free? But here's where ancient wisdom meets modern psychology in the most profound way. This impulse, however well-intentioned, is almost always harmful, not just to the other person, but to your relationship with them and to their natural growth process. To understand why, we need to explore one of nature's most perfect metaphors: the butterfly emerging from its cocoon. When a butterfly is ready to emerge, it begins a tremendous struggle inside the cocoon. The process looks agonizing from the outside. The creature pushes and fights against the walls of its prison, seeming to exhaust itself in the effort. A well-meaning observer might think, I could help by cutting open the cocoon and freeing this poor creature from its struggle. But what that observer doesn't understand is that the struggle itself is essential. The pressure of pushing against the cocoon walls is what forces fluid from the butterfly's body into its wings, giving them the strength needed for flight. Cut open the cocoon prematurely, and you'll have a butterfly with weak, underdeveloped wings that will never be able to fly. Your attempt to help becomes an act of crippling. Human consciousness development follows this exact same principle. When someone is wrestling with their own confusion, their own blind spots, their own unconscious patterns, they're in their cocoon phase. The struggle they're experiencing, the confusion, the repeated failures, the emotional turmoil, these aren't obstacles to their growth, they are the growth. Each time they bump up against the consequences of their unconscious behavior, each moment of confusion or frustration is actually building the psychological muscles they'll need for genuine transformation. Let me share a story that illustrates this perfectly. I had a friend, let's call him David, who would regularly call me to complain about workplace situations. He'd describe in detail how his colleagues were treating him unfairly, how his boss was playing favorites, how he was being passed over for promotions despite his obvious qualifications. From my perspective, I could see the pattern clearly. David had a subtle but persistent arrogance that alienated his co-workers. He'd interrupt people in meetings, dismiss others' ideas without really listening, and had a way of making it clear that he felt intellectually superior to most of his colleagues. His unconscious condescension was creating the very isolation and resistance he was complaining about. The temptation to point this out was enormous. I could see so clearly how a simple shift in his approach, more genuine listening, less need to prove his intelligence, some basic humility, would transform his workplace relationships almost overnight. My fingers would itch to just tell him what I saw, but instead, I chose to simply listen. I asked questions that might lead him toward his own insights, but I never imposed my perceptions on him. This went on for months. David continued his victim stories, continued his unconscious patterns, continued creating the very situations he was complaining about. There were moments when staying silent felt almost cruel, but I trusted the process, trusted that his consciousness was working exactly as it needed to work. Then one day, about 8 months later, David called with a completely different tone. I think I need to look at my own behavior, he said. I've been thinking about how I interact with people at work, and I'm starting to wonder if I might be coming across as arrogant. The insight had arisen naturally, organically, when he was ready to receive it. Because it came from within his own awareness rather than being imposed from outside, he could actually integrate it. He wasn't defensive about it, he was curious, even excited about this new understanding of himself. This illustrates something crucial about the psychology of readiness. When people are caught in victim stories, when they're complaining about their circumstances or other people's behavior, they're not actually asking to see themselves clearly. What they're seeking is validation, support, someone to confirm that their perception of reality is correct. They're in a particular stage of their growth process, where they need to fully experience being the victim before they can recognize their own power and responsibility. Premature insights, observations shared before someone is ready to receive them, almost always create resistance and resentment. The person's ego defenses activate immediately. Instead of recognizing the truth in what you're saying, they feel attacked, misunderstood, or judged. They may even project onto you the very qualities you're trying to help them see in themselves. You're the one who's arrogant, they might say. You think you know everything about me. More damaging still, when you impose insights on someone who isn't ready, you can actually interfere with their natural development process. Just like cutting open the butterfly's cocoon, your premature intervention can weaken their capacity for genuine self-reflection. They may become dependent on external observations rather than developing their own inner awareness. Or they may become so defended against outside feedback that they shut down their receptivity to insights altogether. There's a profound difference between offering observations when asked versus imposing insights when not requested. When someone genuinely asks for feedback, when they say something like, I keep having the same problems in relationships, and I'm wondering what I might be doing wrong. They're signaling their readiness to receive outside perspective. Their consciousness has reached a point where it can integrate new information without triggering massive defensive reactions. But most of the time, people aren't asking for insights about themselves. They're asking for understanding, for empathy, for someone to witness their experience without judgment. Learning to distinguish between these two very different requests is essential for anyone who can see clearly into human nature. The awakened person learns to trust the natural unfolding of consciousness like a flower opening in the morning. You cannot force the petals open without damaging the flower. You can only provide the right conditions and trust the organic process. In human terms, this means offering presence, asking thoughtful questions, modeling the qualities you see as beneficial, and creating safe spaces for people to explore their own awareness. I've seen forced insights backfire countless times. A spiritually aware person, frustrated by watching someone repeat destructive patterns, finally speaks their truth about what they see. The result? The other person becomes defensive, the relationship becomes strained, and the person actually becomes more entrenched in their unconscious behavior as a way of proving the observer wrong. The deepest wisdom here is learning to trust that consciousness itself is intelligent, that each person's awareness will unfold in perfect timing if we don't interfere with the process. Your role isn't to be the awakener of others, it's to be so grounded in your own awareness that you create a field of presence that supports others in their own natural awakening process. This requires tremendous patience and a fundamental trust in the intelligence of life itself. But when you master this art of conscious restraint, you become a true catalyst for transformation, not through what you reveal, but through what you choose to keep sacred. There's a reason why the deepest mystical traditions have always spoken in riddles, metaphors, and parables. They weren't trying to be cryptic for the sake of mystery. They were protecting both the unprepared listener and the profound truth itself. What I'm about to share with you represents perhaps the most dangerous revelation to casually drop in conversation. Your direct experience of the void, the fundamental emptiness that underlies all existence. When spiritual awakening reaches its depths, you encounter something that completely redefines reality as you've known it. You discover that nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, exists as the solid, permanent thing you believed it to be. Everything you can point to, everything you can name, everything you think you are, reveals itself as pure process, pure happening, with no substantial core whatsoever. Think about a river for a moment. You can point to it, name it, even build bridges across it. But try to grab the river itself, what do you get? Water slipping through your fingers. The river isn't a thing at all, it's a continuous flow, a happening. You can never step into the same river twice because it's constantly changing, yet we speak of it as if it's this permanent feature of the landscape. Now here's where it gets profound. Everything is like that river. Your thoughts, your emotions, your body, your personality, even what you call yourself, all of it is river-like. There's no solid, continuous self anywhere to be found, just experience flowing through awareness like water through a riverbed. This realization is incredibly liberating when you're ready for it. It means you're not stuck being who you think you are. That persistent anxiety? It's like weather passing through the sky of your awareness. Those limiting beliefs about yourself? They're just temporary patterns in the flow, not permanent features of your identity. You discover you're not this small, separate, isolated person struggling through life. You're the entire universe expressing itself as this particular pattern of experience. But here's why this truth must be shared with extraordinary care. To someone unprepared, it sounds like the most terrifying nihilism imaginable. They hear, "You don't exist," instead of "You exist, but not in the way you imagine." They interpret it as meaningless randomness, as if you're telling them they're just atoms bouncing around without purpose or significance. I learned this lesson the hard way during a dinner conversation several years ago. A colleague was going through a difficult divorce and was questioning everything about his identity. He was genuinely seeking, asking deep questions about the nature of self and reality. I thought he was ready to hear about the illusory nature of the separate self. I explained how neuroscience shows there's no central command center in the brain, no place where you actually live. I shared how meditation reveals that what we call self is really just thoughts, sensations, and experiences arising and passing away in awareness. I thought I was offering him tremendous freedom, showing him that his suffering was based on a case of mistaken identity. The conversation went catastrophically wrong. Instead of liberation, he felt like I was denying his very existence. "So you're telling me my pain doesn't matter? That my love for my children isn't real? That nothing I've ever done has meaning?" He became genuinely upset, feeling like I was dismissing not just his identity but his entire human experience as some kind of illusion. I realized I had made a crucial error. I had shared medicine without proper preparation, offered a truth that requires careful cultivation to receive safely. What I intended as liberation, he experienced as annihilation. This is why wisdom traditions have always emphasized the gradual path. The Zen masters didn't start students with the deepest koans. The Sufi teachers didn't immediately reveal the most profound mysteries. They understood that consciousness needs to be prepared, like soil being prepared for seeds that would otherwise never take root. The truth of emptiness threatens people's entire identity structure. Without a stable sense of self, they fear they'll simply fall apart. They imagine it means nothing matters, that love isn't real, that their struggles and achievements are meaningless. They can't yet see that recognizing the fluid nature of identity actually makes everything more precious, not less. Think about it this way. When you realize that you're not a separate wave, but the entire ocean expressing itself as this particular wave pattern, does that diminish the wave? Or does it reveal its true magnificence? When you understand that your individual consciousness is the universe becoming aware of itself through your unique perspective, does that make you less significant or infinitely more so? The great teachers throughout history understood this distinction perfectly. They knew that truth is like medicine, healing in the right dose at the right time, potentially poisonous otherwise. The Buddha waited years before teaching certain doctrines. Jesus spoke to the crowds in parables, but shared deeper teachings only with prepared disciples. Rumi embedded the most profound realizations in poetry that could be appreciated on multiple levels. There's a vast difference between telling someone they're not real and helping them discover they're real in a way far more magnificent than they ever imagined. It's not that you don't exist, it's that you exist as the entire cosmos localized as this particular pattern of experience, not as some isolated fragment cut off from the whole. The void, the emptiness, isn't blank nothingness. It's pregnant potential, the creative source from which all experience arises. It's not the absence of meaning, but the space in which all meaning becomes possible. But this understanding must emerge naturally through direct experience, not be imposed through premature explanation. When you've touched this truth directly, you carry tremendous responsibility. You hold knowledge that can either liberate or devastate, depending on how it's shared. The wisdom lies not in keeping it secret forever, but in developing the sensitivity to know when, how, and with whom it can be safely explored. Remember, you're not protecting people from truth. You're protecting truth from misunderstanding and protecting unprepared minds from revelations they're not yet equipped to integrate. The deepest teachings reveal themselves when consciousness is ready to receive them safely, not when we decide it's time to share them. When spiritual awakening reaches its deepest levels, you encounter perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of expanded consciousness, the recognition that morality, as most people understand it, is a human construction. Not wrong, not evil, but constructed nonetheless. You begin to see moral codes for what they truly are. Agreements our species has made to function together, elaborate games we've collectively decided to play. This realization brings a profound sense of freedom that feels both exhilarating and terrifying. You understand that concepts like good and evil aren't cosmic laws written in stone, but rather useful frameworks humans develop to organize society. The Ten Commandments, legal systems, social etiquette, all of it becomes transparent as human invention rather than divine mandate. But here's where the danger lies. The moment you even hint at this understanding to others, you trigger their deepest fears about moral chaos. Say something like, "I'm beyond conventional morality," or "good and evil are just human concepts," and watch how quickly people assume you've become dangerous. They immediately picture you lying, cheating, stealing, or worse, because in their worldview, only external rules prevent humans from becoming monsters. This reaction reveals something profound about how most people relate to morality. They follow moral codes primarily from fear of punishment, social rejection, or divine retribution. The idea that someone could be free from these external constraints while remaining trustworthy seems impossible to them. It's like telling someone who's terrified of heights that you can fly. They can't conceive of safety without solid ground beneath their feet. The tragic irony is that true spiritual freedom actually makes harmful behavior less likely, not more. When you genuinely understand that separation is an illusion, that harming others is literally harming yourself, cruelty becomes as absurd as punching yourself in the face. You don't refrain from stealing because a commandment forbids it, but because you recognize no meaningful boundary between yourself and others. Taking what isn't freely given would be like your left hand stealing from your right hand. This is where most people get confused. They can't fathom how someone can simultaneously be free from moral rules yet act more ethically than those who follow rules religiously. They've never experienced morality as a natural expression of understanding rather than forced compliance with external authority. Think about how a master musician relates to musical rules. They understand harmony, rhythm, and structure so deeply that they can improvise beautifully without consciously following any rules. Their music flows naturally from their understanding, not from fear of playing wrong notes. Similarly, awakened individuals act ethically because ethical action flows naturally from clear seeing, not because they're following a cosmic rulebook. The challenge becomes even more complex when you consider how this freedom expresses itself practically. You still pay your bills, follow traffic laws, and treat people with respect, but now you do these things as conscious choices rather than unconscious compliance. You're like a master actor who knows the play is just a play but gives the performance everything anyway, because the play serves a beautiful purpose. You begin following the spirit of social agreements rather than just their letter. Sometimes this means going beyond what's technically required, helping someone even when you have no obligation to do so. Other times it means recognizing when rigid rule following would cause more harm than good. You develop what might be called contextual ethics, responses that arise from wisdom rather than predetermined formulas. But try explaining this to someone who believes morality comes from external authority, and you'll hit a wall of incomprehension. They can't understand how someone can be simultaneously free from moral rules yet more trustworthy than those who follow rules from fear. It's like trying to explain color to someone who's never seen. They lack the experiential framework to grasp what you're describing. The practical wisdom here is learning to navigate social conventions while knowing they're conventional. You discover the art of participating fully in society's moral agreements without being imprisoned by them. You stop running red lights not because you fear tickets, but because traffic laws create harmony and safety. You tell the truth, not because lying is sinful, but because honesty creates trust and connection. This understanding brings tremendous responsibility along with freedom. When you recognize that you're choosing your actions from genuine understanding rather than following external commands, every choice becomes more conscious, more deliberate. You can't blame your behavior on rules, authorities, or circumstances. You own your responses completely. The temptation to share this liberation can be overwhelming, especially when you see others trapped in moral anxiety, following rules that make them miserable or conflicted. You want to tell them they're free, that they can trust their deeper wisdom. But announcing your freedom from conventional morality typically backfires spectacularly. People become suspicious, start watching you for signs of moral corruption, or dismiss you as dangerous or deluded. The wisest approach is demonstrating this freedom through your actions, rather than declaring it through your words. Let your natural kindness, integrity, and wisdom speak for themselves. When people ask how you remain so calm and centered, focus on practical techniques rather than philosophical revelations about the constructed nature of morality. This is another secret that must remain unspoken, not because it's false, but because it's true in a way that most people aren't ready to understand. Your freedom from conventional morality paradoxically expresses itself through willing participation in social harmony, creating beauty rather than chaos, connection rather than separation. Now, here's where most people misunderstand what I've just shared with you. When I talk about keeping these 5 profound truths to yourself, I'm not suggesting you become a spiritual hermit who never discusses awakening with anyone. That would be just as much of an extreme as the person who can't stop broadcasting their enlightenment experiences to anyone who'll listen. There's a world of difference between pointing towards something and claiming you've captured it in a jar. Thoth understood this distinction perfectly. In the ancient texts, you'll notice he never says, "I am the light," or "I have achieved perfect understanding." Instead, his words dance around truth, like sunlight filtering through leaves, illuminating without blinding, revealing without exposing everything at once. The awakened person learns to speak lightly about the heaviest matters. They suggest rather than assert, invite rather than command. When someone asks them about spiritual experiences, they might say something like, "Sometimes there are moments when the boundaries we normally feel seem less solid," rather than declaring, "I have experienced the dissolution of the ego, self into universal consciousness." Both statements point to the same territory, but one leaves room for the listener's own discovery, while the other creates a wall of otherness. This is the art that most spiritual seekers never master, understanding that words are fingers pointing at the moon, and never confusing the finger with the moon itself. The moment you start believing your descriptions capture the reality they're pointing toward, you've fallen into the trap that has ensnared countless teachers throughout history. Truth transmission happens in ways that completely bypass direct statement. Sometimes it occurs through simple presence. You know how you can walk into a room and immediately sense someone's emotional state without them saying a word? The same principle applies to awakened consciousness. People might not understand your words about non-duality or emptiness, but they can feel when they're in the presence of someone who's genuinely at peace with the fundamental nature of existence. They sense it as a quality of spaciousness around you, a kind of being at home in the universe that's both mysterious and deeply attractive. It's like encountering someone who's completely comfortable in their own skin, but at a much deeper level, comfortable in existence itself. The most powerful spiritual communication often happens through questions that spark genuine inquiry. Instead of telling someone, "Attachment causes suffering," you might ask, "Have you ever noticed how the things we grip most tightly seem to slip away fastest?" The question plants a seed that can grow into understanding, while the statement often just bounces off existing beliefs. Stories and metaphors bypass mental resistance in ways that direct teaching cannot. This is why every wisdom tradition developed its own collection of tales, parables, and analogies. When Jesus spoke in parables, he wasn't being deliberately obscure. He was recognizing that certain truths can only be received indirectly, like peripheral vision that disappears when you look directly at it. The skill lies in reading readiness. There's a profound difference between someone genuinely asking with openness versus someone seeking validation, entertainment, or ammunition for their spiritual ego. The person who's ready often asks quieter questions, sometimes with a quality of vulnerability. They're not looking for impressive concepts to add to their collection. They're genuinely puzzled by something they're experiencing or sensing. The ego seeker, by contrast, asks questions that are really statements in disguise. "Don't you think that most people are just completely unconscious?" Isn't really a question. It's a request for you to confirm their sense of superiority. Learning to recognize this difference becomes crucial for anyone who wants to share spiritual insights responsibly. Context matters enormously. The same truth that could be profoundly helpful in one setting might be completely destructive in another. Sharing insights about the illusory nature of personal identity with someone going through a divorce might not be skillful timing, regardless of how true those insights might be. Wisdom includes knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. The Zen tradition mastered this through koans, those seemingly nonsensical riddles that can't be solved through ordinary thinking. What is the sound of one hand clapping? Isn't meant to be answered logically. It's designed to exhaust the analytical mind until something deeper can emerge. The koan is a finger pointing at the moon of direct experience. Sufi teachers use stories that worked on multiple levels simultaneously. A tale might be entertaining on the surface, instructive in its moral lessons, and transformative in its deeper implications, all at once. The listener receives exactly what they're capable of receiving at their current level of understanding. Indigenous wisdom keepers understood that certain truths could only be transmitted through ceremony and ritual, where the entire being, not just the intellect, could participate in the learning. They recognized that some knowledge lives in the body, in relationship, in connection with the natural world, rather than in concepts that can be spoken. All of this requires tremendous patience. Consciousness awakens in its own timing, like flowers opening to morning light. You can't force a bud to bloom by pulling at its petals. The awakened person learns to trust this natural unfolding, offering what's appropriate when it's appropriate, and then letting go of any attachment to results. Perhaps most importantly, Anyone who shares spiritual insights must maintain the humility of speaking as one beggar telling another where to find bread, never as someone who has permanently arrived telling others how to get there. The moment you start believing you've graduated from the human experience, you've probably just enrolled in a more advanced course in self-deception. The art of sacred communication isn't about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions at the right moments, and trusting that truth has its own way of revealing itself when the conditions are right. Here's something that might seem like a complete contradiction at first glance. If these 5 truths we've been exploring are so profound, so transformative, so essential to human awakening, why keep them hidden? Wouldn't sharing them with everyone accelerate humanity's spiritual evolution? This question reveals one of the deepest mysteries that Thoth understood about consciousness itself. The answer lies in recognizing that awakening doesn't happen through information transfer. You can't download enlightenment like a software update. Consciousness awakens through resonance, through readiness, through a mysterious alchemy that occurs when someone's inner soil has been prepared for the seeds of truth. When you try to plant wisdom in unprepared ground, it either gets rejected entirely or, worse, it gets twisted into something that actually delays genuine awakening. Think about the people in your life who've tried to force their spiritual beliefs on you. Remember that feeling of resistance that arose, even if what they were saying contained elements of truth. That resistance isn't stubbornness, it's consciousness protecting itself from premature exposure to concepts it isn't ready to integrate. Forced spiritual teaching creates the same reaction as any other form of pressure. People push back. But here's where the real magic happens. When you embody these truths silently, when you live from this awakened understanding without announcing it, you become what mystics call a silent teacher. Your presence alone begins to shift the energy field around you. People start noticing something different about you, though they can't quite put their finger on what it is. You seem more centered, more authentic, less reactive to the dramas that consume others. This is the ripple effect of silent awakening, and it's far more powerful than any sermon or spiritual lecture could ever be. One person genuinely living from awakened consciousness affects everyone in their sphere of influence. Your family members start questioning their own patterns. Your co-workers begin to notice how differently you handle stress. Friends find themselves feeling more peaceful in your presence, though they might not understand why. The British biologist Rupert Sheldrake discovered something he called morphic resonance, the idea that when enough members of a species learn something new, it becomes easier for all members of that species to learn the same thing. This principle applies profoundly to spiritual awakening. Each person who genuinely awakens creates invisible pathways in the collective consciousness, making it easier for others to find their way to the same realizations. But here's the crucial part. This only works when the awakening is authentic, embodied, and integrated. When someone has truly transcended the ego's need for validation through visions, when they've genuinely moved beyond seeking external power, when they've actually integrated their understanding of ultimate freedom, their very being becomes a transmission device for these possibilities. Look at the most influential spiritual figures throughout history. Buddha didn't go around telling everyone about his enlightenment experience under the Bodhi tree. He taught practical methods and lived as an example. Jesus didn't describe his mystical visions to crowds. He embodied love and spoke in parables that allowed people to discover truth at their own pace. Lao Tzu wrote the Tao Te Ching and then disappeared into the mountains. These weren't marketing strategies. They were expressions of deep wisdom about how consciousness actually awakens. The difference between evangelical spiritual sharing and authentic spiritual presence is like the difference between pushing a rope and magnetizing metal filings. When you try to push spiritual concepts onto people, you meet resistance. When you embody spiritual truth, you create a magnetic field that draws those who are ready closer, while allowing those who aren't ready to remain at a comfortable distance. This brings us to one of the most subtle ego traps on the spiritual path, the desire to be recognized as spiritually advanced. When you've had profound realizations, when you've touched the infinite, when you've seen through the illusions that still captivate most people, there's a natural impulse to share these experiences. But watch that impulse carefully. How much of it comes from genuine service, and how much comes from the ego wanting recognition for its spiritual achievements? True spiritual maturity includes developing what the Sufis call spiritual courtesy, the wisdom to know when to speak and when to remain silent. This isn't about being secretive or elitist. It's about understanding that consciousness has its own seasons and rhythms. Just as you wouldn't plant seeds in frozen ground, you learn not to share deep spiritual truths with minds that aren't prepared to receive them. I've seen countless examples of premature spiritual teaching actually delaying someone's awakening. When people get exposed to advanced concepts before they've done the foundational inner work, they often use these concepts as spiritual bypasses. They learn to talk a good game about enlightenment, while their emotional patterns remain completely unchanged. They collect spiritual experiences like trophies, while their daily relationships remain dysfunctional. They memorize teachings about transcendence, while their egos actually become more inflated through spiritual pride. This is why Thoth's wisdom emphasizes silence about these 5 particular areas. These aren't casual spiritual topics. They're the deep mysteries that can only be truly understood through direct experience. When you share them prematurely, you risk turning profound truths into mere concepts that people can hide behind rather than realities they must embody. The responsibility that comes with genuine awakening is understanding that your primary service is to be awake, not to make others awake. You can't awaken anyone else. That's not how consciousness works. But you can live so authentically, so presently, so free from the compulsions that drive most people that you become a living demonstration of what's possible. This requires tremendous trust in the intelligence of consciousness itself. It means believing that the same force that awakened you is working through everyone else's life, creating exactly the experiences they need for their own awakening. Your job isn't to accelerate their process or save them from their lessons. Your job is to be so genuinely awake that you add to the morphic field of awakened consciousness, making it easier for others to find their way when their time comes. The most profound spiritual teaching happens in silence, through presence, through the quiet revolution of one person living authentically in a world of pretense. Picture this. You wake up on a Tuesday morning, and as you prepare your coffee, you feel that familiar sense of profound peace that comes from knowing who you truly are. Your phone buzzes with news alerts about global crises, political drama, economic uncertainty. You read them, feel genuine compassion for the suffering involved, but there's no internal chaos, no desperate need to fix or control anything. You simply witness, hold space, and go about your day. This is the paradox of awakened living. You exist simultaneously in 2 worlds, the world of form with its endless dramas and complications, and the world of essence where everything is already perfect, already whole. The challenge isn't choosing between these worlds, it's learning to dance gracefully between them. When your coworker complains about their impossible boss during lunch, you listen with genuine presence. You don't offer spiritual platitudes about how everything happens for a reason, or suggest they try meditation. Instead, you simply be with them in their frustration, and somehow, without saying anything profound, they leave feeling lighter. This is the art of transmission without teaching, allowing your state of being to speak louder than any words ever could. The loneliness can be real, especially in the beginning. You're sitting at family dinner listening to heated debates about politics, watching everyone get triggered and reactive, and you feel like you're observing from behind glass. You love these people deeply, but there's a gap between your inner reality and theirs that feels impossible to bridge. You've learned that trying to wake people up only creates resistance, so you practice what Thoth taught about sacred silence. You love them exactly as they are while holding space for their eventual awakening. But here's what nobody tells you about this loneliness. It transforms into something beautiful. You start recognizing others who are living this same paradox. It's not something you discuss openly. It's something you sense. A knowing glance across a crowded room. A conversation that flows effortlessly into deeper territory without anyone forcing it there. These connections become precious precisely because they're rare and unspoken. You develop what I call spiritual bilingualism, the ability to speak fluent everyday language while simultaneously communicating on entirely different levels. When someone asks how you stay so calm during stressful situations, you might say something simple like, "I've learned that worrying doesn't change outcomes, so I focus on what I can actually control." It's true, relatable, and doesn't require them to understand anything about the illusion of the separate self or the nature of consciousness. Your work life becomes interesting in unexpected ways. Whether you're an accountant, teacher, plumber, or CEO, you bring something different to your role. You're not trying to be spiritual at work, you're simply being authentic. You listen more deeply, react less defensively, and somehow projects that seemed impossible start flowing smoothly when you're involved. Colleagues can't quite put their finger on what's different about you, but they find themselves seeking your perspective on challenging situations. The practical challenges are real, though. When your sister notices you've changed and keeps asking what's different, you learn to redirect gently. I think I'm just getting better at not sweating the small stuff as I get older. When religious family members worry about your spiritual journey, you emphasize the love and peace in your life rather than the concepts that might frighten them. Perhaps the most delicate navigation happens within spiritual communities themselves. You might find yourself outgrowing teachers, concepts, or practices that once served you. The community that supported your initial awakening might now feel limiting or even unconsciously competitive. You learn to participate gracefully, while knowing that your real spiritual life happens in the silence between words, in the ordinary moments that others might consider mundane. Your discernment becomes razor sharp about those rare moments when sharing deeper truths actually serves someone. It's usually not the person asking the most questions or making the most spiritual noise. It's often the quiet seeker who's been doing their inner work without fanfare, who's ready to hear something that might shatter their remaining illusions. Even then, you share not as a teacher, but as a friend offering perspective. You become a bridge for others who are beginning to question reality. When your neighbor mentions feeling empty despite having everything they thought they wanted, you don't launch into explanations about the ego's endless seeking. You simply validate their experience. Yeah, I went through something similar. That feeling of, is this all there is, can be really uncomfortable. Sometimes that's enough to help them feel less alone in their questioning. The freedom that comes from releasing the need to be understood is extraordinary. You no longer feel compelled to defend your perspectives or convince anyone of anything. This isn't spiritual bypassing or indifference. It's genuine respect for everyone's perfect timing and path. You trust the intelligence of life itself to orchestrate each person's awakening in exactly the way that serves them best. Your service becomes invisible, woven into the fabric of ordinary interactions. You hold space for your friend's grief without trying to help them move through it faster. You stay present with your teenager's emotional chaos without needing to fix or teach. You bring peace to tense meetings simply by not adding your own reactivity to the mix, and the deepening never stops. Awakening isn't a destination you reach and then coast from. It's an ongoing process of seeing more clearly, loving more completely, serving more effectively. Each day brings new opportunities to embody these truths more fully, to love more unconditionally, to serve more invisibly. This is the secret life of the spiritually awakened. Profound transformation disguised as ordinary living. Deep service that looks like simply being yourself. Revolutionary love that manifests as everyday kindness. You're changing the world one authentic interaction at a time, and nobody, including you sometimes, realizes the magnitude of what's really happening. The beauty of this path is that it doesn't require anyone else to understand or validate your journey. Your peace becomes your proof, your love becomes your teaching, and your presence becomes your greatest gift to a world desperately hungry for authenticity. Here's the profound truth that Thoth understood above all others, the secret that makes every other spiritual teaching both completely necessary and utterly irrelevant. You're already there. Right now, as you're listening to these words, you are already everything you're seeking to become. The entire spiritual journey is consciousness playing the most elaborate game of hide and seek with itself, and you've been seeking what you've never actually lost. This isn't some comforting platitude or New Age wishful thinking. This is the cosmic joke that becomes blindingly obvious once you see it, yet remains completely invisible until that moment of recognition. We spend lifetimes meditating to find peace, when peace is the awareness in which meditation arises. We seek enlightenment through practices, when enlightenment is what's aware of the one practicing. We chase awakening experiences, when the very consciousness having those experiences is already awake. Think about it for a moment. What is it that's been present through every single experience of your life? What's been aware of your childhood, your dreams, your spiritual seeking, your moments of doubt? That unchanging awareness, that constant presence that witnesses everything but is touched by nothing, that's what you actually are. It's not hidden somewhere waiting to be discovered. It's so immediate, so present, that we completely overlook it while searching for something more exotic or dramatic. The awakened masters throughout history have all pointed to this same recognition. When Buddha spoke of enlightenment, he described it as simply waking up to what was already true. When Jesus said, "I and the Father are one," he wasn't claiming a special status. He was describing the recognition available to anyone willing to look deeply enough. Thoth encoded this understanding in his teachings about the fundamental unity of all existence, not as philosophy but as lived reality. But here's why this truth remains so hidden in plain sight. It's too simple. We've been conditioned to believe that anything truly valuable must be difficult to attain, must require years of practice, must be earned through suffering or discipline. The idea that our deepest nature is immediately accessible, that we're already what we're seeking, contradicts everything we've been taught about achievement and progress. This recognition brings with it a profound humor and an even deeper compassion. The humor comes from seeing the magnificent absurdity of it all, like someone frantically searching for their glasses while wearing them, or looking everywhere for keys that are already in their hand. We've been like waves on the ocean, desperately seeking to become wet, not realizing they're already made of water. And the compassion flows naturally when you understand that everyone around you is also already there, even while they're convinced they're lost. You see your friends struggling with meditation, trying so hard to find peace, and you recognize that the awareness witnessing their struggle is already the peace they seek. You watch someone chase spiritual experiences, and you see that what's aware of their seeking is already awake. This understanding completely transforms your relationship to spiritual practice. You no longer meditate to become enlightened. You meditate as an expression of the enlightenment you already are. You don't practice presence to achieve some future state. You practice as a celebration of the presence that's already here. Every technique, every teaching, every moment of seeking becomes a form of play rather than work, an expression rather than an acquisition. When you truly grasp this, you understand why all those warnings about sharing spiritual insights become even more crucial. If someone isn't ready to recognize their own inherent awakeness, telling them about it won't create the recognition. In fact, it often creates the opposite, a mental concept that actually obscures the direct recognition. They start seeking the already there, as if it was somewhere else, which is perhaps the most subtle trap of all. What's particularly beautiful about this realization is its complete ordinariness. Being fully awake doesn't look like floating 3 feet off the ground or radiating golden light. It looks remarkably like being completely, authentically human. You still have preferences, still feel emotions, still navigate the practical aspects of life. But there's a fundamental ease, a recognition that whatever arises is arising within your own essential nature. This creates an interesting dance between what we might call absolute truth and relative truth. Absolutely, you're already there. Nothing needs to be fixed, achieved, or awakened to. Relatively, the journey continues. There are still insights to integrate, patterns to understand, ways of expressing this recognition more fully in daily life. Both are true simultaneously, and holding this paradox without needing to resolve it is part of the maturation of understanding. Living from this recognition doesn't mean becoming passive or abandoning growth. Instead, it's like the difference between a desperate person digging for water in the desert versus someone who already knows where the well is, simply enjoying the process of drawing from it. The actions might look similar from the outside, but the internal experience is completely different. Perhaps most remarkably, this understanding brings a deep appreciation for the magnificent game consciousness is playing through each of us. Every seeker, every teacher, every moment of confusion, and every flash of clarity, all of it is consciousness exploring itself, knowing itself, playing at forgetting and remembering its own nature. From this perspective, there are no mistakes, no wasted time, no spiritual failures. There's only the infinite creativity of awareness expressing itself through countless forms and experiences. The profound irony is that by the time you truly understand why these 5 secrets must remain hidden, you've also recognized that there was never actually anything to hide or reveal. The secret was always hiding in plain sight, closer than your own breath, more intimate than your own thoughts. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting, "I understood it."